This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you want Magic singles or sealed product, use my link in the description. Hi everyone, I'm Neat Sahone, and in this video I'm continuing with my Avatar The Last Airbender set review. I've already looked at the multicolored, colorless, and white cards, and in this video I'm continuing with a look at the blue ones. For each of them, I'll discuss how I think they'll perform in Limited, that means draft and sealed, and I'll punctuate each evaluation with the letter grade. If you're new to my set reviews and unsure of what my letter grades mean, you can find a guide in the description for this video. There are some important things to keep in mind as I review these cards. First, because we're only talking about draft and sealed, I'm only going to be looking at cards that can be found in play boosters. This set has lots of supplementary products that have cards that won't be showing up in play boosters. So if there's a card you think is missing from this video, it's probably not in play boosters. There is a bonus sheet to consider for play boosters, but it's super rare, with one appearing in every 25 packs, so I'm going to look at them in the last set review video after covering the main set. These are also my evaluations of these cards before it's possible to play this new limited format, because my goal is to have my set review done in time for the pre-release, and that means I'm going to be wrong about some stuff, but as the format comes into focus, I'll be doing videos where I discuss how things have turned out. Lastly, I want to let you know that there are some set review related perks for being a channel member or a patron. You get access to my ongoing set notes during preview season, and you'll also get a spreadsheet with all of my grades once a set review is complete. If those perks interest you, check out the description where you can find out how to support the channel using one of those methods. Alright, without further ado, let's dive in with a look at the blue cards in Avatar The Last Airbender. First up, we've got Accumulate Wisdom, which for one generic and a blue is an uncommon instant lesson. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. Put one of those cards into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Put each of those cards into your hand instead if there are 3 or more lesson cards in your graveyard. So the baseline here is Anticipate with the useful lesson subtype. While there are no learn cards in this set, there are lesson payoffs, like this card. And Anticipate is a card you can usually play, especially in a format where spells matter a little more than usual. It's like a C-. The card selection is solid for the cost. But then, the fact that this can turn into a 2-mana draw 3 in the late game is really absurd. A 2-mana instant speed card that drew you 3 cards would just be an A. That's a 3-for-1 for very little mana. Getting 3 lessons is a big ask, and you're not likely to be there early at all, even in a lesson-heavy deck. But getting there late is going to happen in this format. To evaluate a card like this, we do have to try to predict how often it's just Anticipate, and how often it's Ancestral Recall for 2 mana. I'd guess about 80% of the time it's Anticipate, but that 20% when it draws you 3 is a big deal. I think this is a B because the ceiling is so high, and it might even be deserving of like a build around A, although I don't think there will be very many decks where it will be like automatic that this draws you 3 cards, but it also wouldn't completely shock me if this is even better than I think. It's also great that it's a lesson too, because it's an enabler for lesson payoffs and a lesson payoff. Next up, it's Benevolent River Spirit. For 2 blue mana, it's a 4/5 spirit at uncommon. As an additional cost to cast it, you waterbend 5 generic. While paying a waterbend cost, you can tap your artifacts and creatures to help. Each one pays for 1 generic. It also has flying and ward 2, and when it enters, you scry 2. So casting this for a reasonable amount of mana seems doable in the mid to late game, and while this can let you double spell, it's not nearly as impressive to play this on like turn 6. It still has an imposing body, and the scry is great too, and sometimes you'll be able to turbo it out, but I don't envision this getting down early enough to be super insane all that often. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Boomerang Basics, which for 1 blue mana is an uncommon sorcery lesson. Return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If you control that permanent, draw a card. 1 blue for a sorcery that bounces a non-land is a reasonable playable, although bounce being instant is one of the best ways to use it, since typically bouncing is card disadvantage. So being instant speed can sometimes allow you to get a card because you can use it in response to tricks and stuff like that. But the mode where you bounce your own thing with this can be pretty good, and this is a super cheap sorcery and lesson in a format where both of those things really matter. I think it's a C+. Next up, it's Crashing Wave. For 2 blue mana, it's an uncommon sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you can waterbend X. Tap up to X target creatures, then distribute 3 stun counters among tapped creatures your opponents control. This can have a big effect for not a whole lot of mana, but it's also the kind of card that's really only good if you're ahead and can end the game quickly. You can use this sort of thing defensively to be sure, but then you're kind of just fogging or temporarily removing something, and those effects don't play that well in Limited. I do like that it's flexible. Sometimes you can just stun one thing for 3 turns. Sometimes you can tap all of your opponent's stuff and stun multiple things. But I do think it takes enough work, and it's not that useful when you're behind, so I think it's probably just a C. Next up, it's Ember Island Production, which for 3 generic and 2 blue is an uncommon sorcery. It says choose one, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it's not legendary, and it's a 4/4 hero in addition to its other types. Or create a token that's a copy of target creature an opponent controls, except it's not legendary, and it's a 2/2 coward in addition to its other types. So with that first mode, you are reasonably likely to get 5 mana's worth. Getting a bigger copy of a creature with any decent ability at all should be worth it, as should getting a smaller copy of something big. The second mode will be harder to get something good out of, but if your opponent has a creature with a great enters trigger, it can definitely be worthwhile. All in all, this looks like a C to me. Next up, it's First Time Flyer, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 1/2 human pilot ally at common. It's got flying, and it gets +1/+1 as long as there's a lesson in your graveyard. A 2 mana 1/2 flyer is a bad card, but this set has enough lessons for this to be a 2 mana 2/3 with flying, potentially relatively early in the game. I don't like the baseline, and it's not exactly an exciting lesson payoff. It's not like the ceiling gives you this absurd card or anything, so it's probably still just a C-. Next up, it's Flexible Waterbender, which for 3 generic and a blue is a 2/5 human warrior ally at common. It's got Vigilance and Waterbend 3. This creature has base power and toughness 5/2 until end of turn. Creatures who can modulate their power and toughness like this are usually better than they look, as your opponent has to account for both possibilities anytime this creature is in combat, and this having Vigilance makes that even more relevant, especially because it can tap itself for its own Waterbend ability. I don't love that it will cost like 3 mana straight up sometimes, but Waterbend does mean it'll also be free sometimes. This looks like a C to me. Next up, it's Forecasting Fortune Teller, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 1/3 human advisor ally at common. When it enters, you make a clue token. It might be simple, but it's really good. Even in a format with no additional synergy, you would play a 2 mana 1/3 that makes a clue 100% of the time. And in this format, you can tap it for water bending, in addition to, just cashing it in for a card. The Fortune Teller is also not bad with air bending because you can recast it to get another clue. It also has the ally creature type, which matters. It just seems like it does a whole bunch of stuff, and it's just a good rate to begin with. That this just looks like a really good common, perhaps blue's best common. We've just seen so many reasonably costed creatures that make a clue perform well over the years. I'm giving it a B-. Next up, it's Geyser Leaper, which for 4 generic and a blue is a 4/3 human warrior ally at common. It's got flying and waterbend 4. Draw a card, then discard a card. 5 mana creatures with 3 toughness always make my alarm bells go off, because in most formats that means lower rarity 2 mana cards can kill it, and that outcome is kind of catastrophic in terms of mana equity. So you need an enters trigger or some big upside to offset this problem, and this doesn't really get there. I mean, I think flying plus this ability does enough to keep it from being horrendous, but it still won't make the cut all the time. It just doesn't seem like a 5-drop. I'm giving it a C-. Next up, it's Giant Koi, which for 4 generic and 2 blue is a 5/7 fish at common. It has Waterbend 3. This creature can't be blocked this turn, and it also has Island Cycling for 2 generic. A 6 mana 5/7 that can become unblockable reasonably efficiently in the late game can definitely close out games, and if you get this early and need a land, it can do that job too. It's notable that it can become unblockable a lot more efficiently than a lot of similar cards we've seen recently that cost like 6 or 7 mana to become unblockable, so it's even really efficient at becoming unblockable without Waterbend, and once you throw in Waterbend, there are chances that you're tapping like clues and stuff to make this thing unblockable. And in that case, it's going to feel even better. So this looks like a solid card to me, giving it a C. Next up, it's Grand, which for 1 blue mana is a 1/2 legendary human peasant ally at uncommon. When she becomes tapped, you draw a card and then discard a card. Non-creature spells you cast cost 1 generic less to cast as long as there are 3 or more lesson cards in your graveyard. So the idea here is that you tap her for water bending and get to loot, and that's definitely sweet. Sometimes you'll play her on 1 and be able to just attack with her on turn 2 and loot 2. The cost reduction effect will come up sometimes, and she can even help you get there thanks to looting. I do worry about her when you're in situations where you don't really have water bending or anything else you can do with her, in which case she's going to be really underwhelming. So I'm giving her a C. Next up, it's Honest Work, which for 1 blue mana is an uncommon enchantment aura. Enchant creature an opponent controls. When this aura enters, tap enchanted creature and remove all counters from it. Enchanted creature loses all abilities and is a citizen with base power and toughness 1/1 and can tap for 1 colorless, and it's named Humble Merchant. It loses all other creature types and names. I don't love this. Sometimes paying 1 mana for an effect that makes a creature much less relevant is good, and this even gets around counters, which can make a card like this really bad, and it taps the creature when you cast it, so it won't be blocking that turn either. Those are things I like about this, but I don't like giving my opponent mana and giving them a 1/1 body that can definitely be relevant. In a set with airbending, it feels like this gets worse than usual too, as there are lots of ways for your opponent to just airbend their creature and get it back. You can even tap it for colorless, airbend the creature that it's on, and then just spend 1 more mana to cast it again. Sometimes it'll feel like great removal to be sure, but you don't really want to play it early because the creatures aren't good enough for this to be relevant and you don't want to ramp your opponent's mana. It's really only going to feel good in the late game when it can deal with some really big threat relatively efficiently. Like I said, there are lots of ways around it even in that case, so I think this just ends up being a C. Next up, it's Iguana Parrot, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 2/2 lizard bird pirate at common. It's got flying, vigilance, and prowess. Prowess is nice, but a 3 mana 2/2 is one of those problematic stat lines that we've seen not be very good lately on cards that don't have enters triggers. Still, flying and vigilance and prowess does mean this can be a reasonable threat, or at least threaten to be a reasonable threat, and it's one that can still block after attacking, so I think it ends up being a lot better than most 3 mana 2/2 flyers of late have been, but it's probably still just a C. Next up, it's Invasion Submersible, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 0/0 artifact vehicle at uncommon. When it enters, you return up to 1 other target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and it has Exhaust, which means you can only use this ability once, and it's Waterbend 3. This vehicle becomes an artifact creature, put 3 +1/+1 counters on it. So 3 mana for an artifact that bounces an on-land permanent is playable in this format because there's a lot you can do with that artifact just sitting on the board, like Waterbend. Then later in the game, it can become a pretty real creature. I mean, the worst case scenario here is kind of that this is a 6 mana 3/3 that enters and bounces an opposing non-land permanent, except you can pay for it in installments. And it's even better than that because Waterbend makes it easier to turn this into a creature. It can tap itself, for example, to help you Waterbend. So it just feels to me like this is going to be a lot like a Mana War-like card, especially because Waterbend will sometimes allow you to not have any extra mana around and still be able to turn this into a creature right away. So this looks like a pretty good uncommon to me overall. I'm giving it a B. Next up, it's Quentia, which for 1 generic and a blue is a common instant lesson. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 2 generic. This is an alright counterspell. Sure, they can kind of ignore it in the late game a decent chunk of the time, but it hits any card type and can still stop a spell reasonably often, and it feels particularly good when you counter something expensive for only 2 mana. And being a lesson certainly has upside, especially in blue, so I'm giving it a C. Next up, it's Katara, Bending Prodigy, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 2/3 legendary human warrior ally at uncommon. At the beginning of your end step, if she's tapped, you put a +1/+1 counter on her, and she has Waterbend 6, draw a card. So keep in mind she can tap herself for her own Waterbend ability, so getting counters on her is easier than you might think. Furthermore, drawing a card is definitely what I want to be doing with Waterbend. This is basically a value engine that can also be a threat in its own right, and while the baseline's not great, the upside is good enough for me to want this in my deck a lot of the time. It is a little sad she only checks to see if she's tapped at the beginning of your end step, because if you could leave this ability up and threaten to use it on your opponent's turn and still get the counter, you'd be very happy, and you still can leave the ability up. I'm just saying it would be even sweeter if you could get that counter during your opponent's end step. Either way, she's a good card. I'm giving her a B-. Next up, it's Knowledge Seeker, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 2/1 Fox Spirit and uncommon. It's got Vigilance. When you draw your second card each turn, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and when this creature dies, you make a clue token. So I'm already going to play a 2 mana 2/1 with Vigilance that dies into a clue. That's going to make your deck every single time. And this is even better than that because it can also grow. And with lots of clues in the set, it's not going to be that hard for it to grow. It's generally going to generate a 2-for-1, and it's the kind of card where your opponent just feels bad about it no matter what, because if they trade for it, it doesn't feel good. But if they don't kill it, it might turn into a huge threat. So it's very good. I'm giving it a B. Next up, it's the Legend of Kurik, which for 2 generic and 2 blue is a mythic rare enchantment saga. Chapter 1 and 2 say scry 2, then draw a card. Chapter 3 says exile this saga, then return it to the battlefield transformed under your control. Comes back as Avatar Kurik, a 4/3 legendary avatar that's colorless. And it says whenever you cast a spell, create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token with. This token can't be blocked or be blocked by non-spirit creatures. And it has exhaust, waterbend 20. Take an extra turn after this one. So this doesn't add to the board right away. That's a little bit of a problem, but it does give you really nice card draw and card selection before turning into a 4/3 that will start spitting out 1/1s, which actually makes the time walk effect kind of doable, though I still wouldn't count on pulling it off like every time. You get a ton of value here for 4 mana, including card advantage and a potential win condition. I'm giving this an A. It's definitely a bomb. Next up, it's Lost Days, which for 4 generic and a blue is a common instant lesson. The owner of target creature or enchantment puts it into their library second from the top or on the bottom. You create a clue token. We see a similar effect for 4 mana, always be a solid card in limited, and while I don't love that I'm paying 1 mana more for it here, the fact it gets put in 2 from the top is an upgrade, as is getting a clue. That means it can generate a legitimate 2 for 1 and throw in the lesson upside, and this looks even more attractive. It's still 5 mana. You don't want that many 5 mana removal spells in your deck, but it's worth having one of these in most of your blue decks, even taking it somewhat highly. I'm giving it a C+. Next up, it's Master Paku, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 1/3 legendary human advisor ally at uncommon with prowess. When it becomes tapped, target player mills X cards, where X is the number of lesson cards in your graveyard. A 2 mana 1/3 with prowess is fine, and that's good because the tap trigger isn't particularly relevant most of the time. It can sometimes be used to help you set up your graveyard stuff, like getting 3 lessons into your graveyard for cards that care about that. And on really rare occasions, maybe you can use it to mill your opponent out. But needing lessons in particular is a pretty real hurdle, so I think this is just a C. Next up, it's the Mechanist, Aerial Artisan, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 1/3 legendary human artificer ally at rare. Whenever you cast it on creature spell, create a clue token, and you can tap the Mechanist, and until end of turn, target artifact token you control becomes a 3/1 construct artifact creature with flying. So the stats here are rough for 3 mana, and it doesn't generate immediate value most of the time. But getting a clue for every non-creature spell you cast is a huge deal, and that would be true even if the Mechanist couldn't animate clues into 3/1 flyers that can usually smash in for some damage. I'm giving this a B. Next up, it's North Pole Patrol, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 2/3 human soldier ally at uncommon. You can tap it to untap another target permanent you control, and it has Waterbend 3 and you tap it to tap target creature an opponent controls. These aren't the greatest stats, but this can ramp your mana or be used to offset the downside of waterbending to an extent. The tap effect will feel pretty good when you use it, but it is a little costly even with the bending upside. I think this is a C+. Next up, it's Octopus Form, which for 1 blue mana is a common instant lesson. Target creature you control gets +1/+1 and gains hexproof until end of turn. Untap it. This is pretty much Shore Up with some extra format-specific synergy thanks to being a lesson, and Shore Up has been a solid card in the past, especially when there's a non-creature spell deck in the format, and this format has one of those. Shore Up is good because it can blink just about any removal spell, and it's not terrible in combat either. It's a cheap way to get a lesson in your graveyard, a cheap way to save your creature, a cheap way to trigger your spell payoff, so I think it's a C. Next up, it's Otter Penguin, which for 1 generic and a blue is a 2/1 Otter Bird at common. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, this creature gets +1/+2 until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. So the baseline is bad here. A 2 mana 2/1 is pretty much unplayable in today's Magic, but if you can consistently draw an additional card during your turn, like with clues, this is a real threat and a way to close out the game if you have a repeatable way to draw cards, because it'll be getting in for 3 every turn. It is a little funny that it also buffs its toughness, but I guess that means occasionally if you draw 2 cards on your opponent's turn, you can surprise them with a 3/3. This looks like a C to me. Next up, it's Rowdy Snowballers, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 2/2 human peasant ally at common. When it enters, you tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. This enters trigger tends to play well, as it lets you add to the board while kind of taking away from the opponent's board. It can let your 2-drop get in for a hit early, and in the late game, it can sometimes really open the floodgates for a really great swing. I'm giving this a C+. Next up, it's Secrets of Bloodbending, which costs 4 blue mana for a mythic rare sorcery lesson. As an additional cost to cast it, you can waterbend 10. You control target opponent during their next combat phase. If this spell's additional cost was paid, you control that player during their next turn instead. Exile Secret of Bloodbending. This is a really cool card, and I don't think completely unplayable in Limited either. It's probably not great. 4 blue mana is always a big hurdle, but I do think controlling your opponent during combat is pretty much the best thing about a Mindslaver effect in Limited, since you can make all kinds of ugly attacks. That option isn't always there, but it usually is. You can usually send in a couple of their smaller creatures and make them die by blocking with your creatures. Obviously, waterbending and taking control of their whole turn is sweet, but that'll be tough. I think this is probably a D, though I'd like to see it be even better. Next up, it's Serpent of the Past, which for 5 generic and 2 blue is a 6/5 Serpent at uncommon. If there are 3 or more lesson cards in your graveyard, you may cast a spell as though it had flash, and it costs 1 generic less to cast for each non-creature, non-land card in your graveyard. This is a build around. We've seen similar big serpents in the past who get cheaper to cast when there are spells in your graveyard, and this can do it a bit more flexibly because it'll also count enchantments and artifacts too. It having flash will be a little harder to get going. 3 lessons is a lot. You're not going to get there all the time, but that's okay because this would be a good card even without that lesson upside in the right deck. When you do have flash, you can flash it in, of course, and ambush block things and have a 2-for-1 up front, which is going to feel really good. But yeah, it needs a build around grade. It's probably a D+ in a lot of blue decks, but a B- in a deck that gets there on spells, especially cheap ones and discarding cards to get them into your graveyard. Next up, it's Sokka's Haiku, which for 3 generic and 2 blue is an uncommon instant lesson. Counter target spell, draw a card, then mill 3 cards, untap target land. It's a bit costly, but it generates a 2-for-1 and then gives you a tiny bit of additional value, milling some of your cards, which is likely to help in blue, and even untapping a land. The land untap is unlikely to matter as much, but sometimes it will. And of course, the lesson type, as we've seen throughout this video, is useful, giving this a C+. Next up, it's the Spirit Oasis, which for 2 generic and a blue is an uncommon legendary enchantment shrine. When it enters, you draw a card for each shrine you control. Whenever another shrine you control enters, draw a card. I'm not much of a believer in the shrine deck in this particular format. They all have pretty bad baselines, to say the least. Some of them are just terrible if they're the only shrine you have, and you just can't count on consistently getting another shrine even if you do have 2 of them in your deck. I mean, this is a worse divination as a baseline, and even if you play another shrine, you're just getting to the point where it is divination, which isn't particularly good. Sure, it'll synergize with your other shrine too, so maybe it's a little bit better than that, but it just has such a horrible baseline, and building around them just isn't very easy. I think this one's just an F. Next up, it's Spirit Water Revival, which for 1 generic and 2 blue is a rare sorcery. As an additional cost to cast it, you can waterbend 6, draw 2 cards. If this spell's additional cost was paid, instead shuffle your graveyard into your library, draw 7 cards, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Exile Spirit Water Revival. Wow. Just wow. So the baseline here is a harder to cast divination. That's a playable card. Not a great one, but the waterbend mode on this is absurd. It basically becomes a one-sided time twister. One of the power 9. It results in you drawing a ton of cards and pulling way ahead. You do shuffle your graveyard into your library, and in blue, sometimes you might regret shuffling some lessons into your library depending on what you have going on, but drawing 7 cards is going to more than make up for that. And the waterbending cost isn't insane either. I mean, you're going to have mana and artifacts and creatures around in the later game where you can easily cast this and reload your hand. Now, you may not be able to do anything else that turn, but again, it's worth it because you get such massive card advantage out of a card like this. This is another card where we have to think about how often it is just like a harder to cast divination, which is a pretty mediocre card, and how often it's a one-sided time twister. You're not going to have access all the time to the one-sided time twister, or it would be just a straight up A, maybe even an A+. I think it's probably a B+ because sometimes you will have to fire it off as a super mediocre divination, and you're just not always going to have time to turn it into the whole time twister thing, but you're going to be able to do it often enough for this to deserve a pretty high grade. Next up, it's Teo, Spirited Glider, which for 3 generic and a blue is a 1/4 legendary human pilot ally at uncommon. It's got flying. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control with flying attack, draw a card, then discard a card. When you discard a non-land card this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. This is pretty good. It basically gives you a connive trigger when you attack with a flyer, and we know connive is a really good ability, and it counts itself as well as other creatures. Not at the same time, mind you, as it does say one or more, but what I mean is if you have another flyer in play when Teo comes down, you can get the trigger immediately, and then on later turns, Teo on his own can trigger it if necessary. And I think blue decks, especially blue-white decks, are going to be able to trigger it enough the turn this comes down for it to feel a lot like a strong enters trigger that can then generate even more value later in the game. So, looks pretty good to me. The stats obviously aren't great, but I think it does enough to be a B-. Next up, it's Tiger Seal. It's 1 blue mana for a 3/3 cat seal at rare. It's got Vigilance. At the beginning of your upkeep, tap this creature. When you draw your second card each turn, untap this creature. So, the turn you play this, it can at least block for 1 round before tapping itself down and refusing to untap until you draw extra cards. That's a pretty big hurdle, and most of the time when you can draw extra cards, a 3/3 on board isn't exactly lighting the world on fire. I think this is probably a D+. It's just going to be kind of a liability where it doesn't do anything on the board a little too often, and then once it does start doing something, it's not going to be that good. Next up, it's Tai Li Chi Blocker, which for 2 generic and a blue is a 2/1 legendary human performer ally at rare. It's got Flash and Prowess, and when it enters, you tap up to 1 target creature. It doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as you control Tai Li. This is pretty great. A 3 mana 2/1 with Flash and the ability to just stun a creature for a turn is a card you definitely play, so throw in Prowess and the fact that it ends up more like a pseudo Banisher Priest effect, where your opponent largely loses access to their creature until they get rid of Tai Li, and we have a very good card. I'm giving this an A-. Next up, it's the Unagi of Kyoshi Island, which for 3 generic and 2 blue is a 5/5 legendary serpent at rare. It's got Flash. It has Ward, Waterbend 4. That actually is a downside to have it be Waterbend instead of just 4 because basically it's an easier to pay for Waterbend, so keep that in mind. Anyway, whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw 2 cards. So a 5 mana 5/5 with Flash is a card that has no problem coming down and ambush blocking and surviving, and your opponent frequently won't be able to interact with it that turn either, thanks to Ward. So they're just going to end up behind the 8 ball to start. Throw in the fact that this can also draw you extra cards, and it's extra awesome. There are enough clues in this set that you can flash this in and net some extra cards. So whether you flash it into ambush block or you flash it in response to your opponent sacking a clue, you're kind of starting with a 2-for-1 and then you have a huge creature on board that is a little harder to kill than normal. So I think this ends up being a bomb too, giving it an A-. Next up, it's Wan Shi Tong Librarian, which for X and 2 blue is a 1/1 legendary bird spirit at Mythic rare. It has Flash, Flying, and Vigilance, and when it enters, you put X plus and +1 counters on him, then draw half X cards, rounded down. Whenever an opponent searches their library, put a plus and +1 counter on Wan Shi Tong and draw a card. So you want to pay at least 2 for X, in which case you get a 4 mana 3/3 with Flying, Flash, and Vigilance that draws you a card. That's something I'm very happy with, and this becomes way more potent later. I wouldn't count on it gaining tons of counters from your opponent searching their library, but that's upside on a card that's already incredibly powerful, so it doesn't really matter if that never happens. This is still going to be one of the strongest cards in the set. I'm giving it an A. It's basically always a good value play, and it scales as the game goes on. Next up, it's Waterbender Ascension, which for 1 generic and a blue is a rare enchantment. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a quest counter on this enchantment. Then if it has 4 or more quest counters on it, draw a card. And it has Waterbend 4, target creature can't be blocked this turn. This is really slow to get going, and while waterbending can help on that front, I'm still not very impressed. This does very little on its own, and there are plenty of boards where you can't take advantage of this, even when you can do something with it. I think it's a D. Next up, it's Waterbending Lesson, which for 3 generic and a blue is a common sorcery lesson. Draw 3 cards and discard a card unless you waterbend 2. 4 mana to draw 3 and discard 1 at sorcery speed is not great, but it's not the worst card ever either. Not adding to the board can be bad when you're spending that much mana, but still, that's some serious card advantage, and sometimes this will be 4 mana to draw 4, which is great. I think this is the kind of card that doesn't add to the board that you'll be able to play one of, especially if your deck's good at waterbending and cares about lessons. I'm giving it a C. Next up, it's Watery Grass, which for 1 blue mana is a common enchantment aura with Enchant Creature. Enchanted Creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step, and it has Waterbend 5. Enchanted Creature's owner shuffles it into their library. So this is a nice cheap blue removal spell. It's about as cheap as can be, which is great, but keep in mind it does not tap the creature you put it on. Meaning, if it isn't already tapped, you're going to have to deal with another attack or a block or whatever, Unless you also have the ability to pay the waterbend cost, in which case it becomes a traditional removal spell that gets rid of something entirely. Alternatively, you can put it on something early to lock it down and then waterbend later if you need to. It is another aura removal spell that airbend makes me worry about a little bit because those are all going to be a lot worse in a set with that mechanic. But I do think this is cheap and flexible enough to be a C+. And our last blue card is You, the Moon Spirit, which for 3 generic and a blue is a 3/3 legendary spirit ally at rare. It's got Flying and Vigilance and Waterbend 5, and you tap it. You may cast a non-creature spell from your hand without paying its mana cost. This looks a lot more exciting than it actually is. A 4-mana 3/3 with Flying and Vigilance, probably a C+ at best these days. And that's pretty much what this will be. It is tempting to imagine waterbending and going wild, but you just won't do it often enough. Once you're spending mana and tapping those permanents, the spell you play has to be amazing to make up for the setup, which also included casting this in the first place, and most spells in Limited aren't anywhere near awesome enough to make that worth it. Basically, this doesn't give you that much of a discount to begin with, and a discount alone is hard to take advantage of in Limited, where power levels are generally lower, so I think this is just a C+. Sometimes it'll give something flash, which can be cool, but trust me, we've seen similar effects dozens of times at this point, and they're never good in Limited, but at least in this case, they put it on a pretty efficient creature. So those are all the blue cards in Avatar: The Last Airbender. In the next video, I'll look at all the black ones. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. And if you want to catch up on the past videos of the set review, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.